Hey, everybody. Welcome to Up Close and Personal. I'm Tony Gapastione. I'm live in Redwood City, California.
And I'm Matt Nightingale. I'm live in Santa Rosa, California, as always.
So Matt and I have been doing these Up Close and Personals every other week in the fall here, and we host conversations. We are a church that is trying to just be intentional with faith conversations and talking to people who are living out their faith. Our vision is to explore God together. And sometimes we host people who are part of our church, and other times we host people who are actively living out their faith in unique and creative ways and intentional ways in the world. And today we have my friend Michelle Vilchez, who is the executive director of the Peninsula Conflict Resolution Center.
I love it. Welcome, Michelle.
Hi, guys. I'm live from San Mateo, by the way.
Yeah, you are.
I'm live from San Mateo. I live in Menlo Park, but I'm in San Mateo today.
And Michelle and I connected, I think almost 3 years ago-ish now. And she runs this really awesome organization that does a lot of good work. Obviously, they have the word conflict and resolution in their title. And I thought, well, Michelle has her own personal faith story, but she also is doing these really cool things and work and activism. So I thought, let's merge these two together and have her share her life and story. So Michelle, let's just first start out by just telling us a little bit about your personal story of faith and how you got to be who you are in regards to how you express your faith in the world, or however you want to say that.
For sure. And Matt and Tony, thank you so much for hosting me. I feel so honored. When Tony asked me to be a part of the quest, I just was so excited, especially right now, because we're finding so many unique ways to be in community with each other. And so, the faith community, it's really important for us, the body, to continue to be together and fellowship in these unique ways. So thanks.
Yeah.
So my name is Michelle Vilchez. I am the daughter of Alejandro Serna Najar and Virginia Cordova Najar. These were my parents, and my mother has since passed. She's been gone now 12, going on 13 years, and I am a child of farm worker parents and child of immigrant parents who traveled throughout the region, following the crops and really determining that they were going to fight for a better life for their children, really, in essence. And that's a pretty common story, right? When you hear, especially we're in California. I was going to say we're in California, but I don't want to think that's another country.
She's calling me out on an inside joke there. So quick stories.
Let's hear this. Come on.
She was telling. We did a podcast together, and she was talking about. she was talking about her family or something, and she said in Colorado. I said, wait.
Colorado.
Colorado. What? Colorado. Where is that?
Mexico?
Is that like Michoacan? I don't know that.
I said, wait, let me restate it. Colorado.
Colorado.
California, California.
So you're...
It really is California.
So you're in California, okay. I do hablo un poquito de español, okay? Necesito practicar.
It's been our podcast that you've done a really good job, Tony. I'm really proud of you. We have all the states down. So my parents they were, my dad in particular, who was raised Catholic, pretty traditional Catholic, from very familiar in terms of where the region of Mexico that my father's family comes from. And when he came to California, he, in essence, was shared the gospel of Christ was shared with him on a completely different level that he had ever experienced before. And he, in that moment, decided that he was going to dedicate the rest of his life to ministry, and really in service to others, and, went to school and received education. My dad, it's so funny. My father is 76. He turned 76 in September, and he has been a pastor for the last 53 years of his 70 years of life. So he really, it essentially believes everything that you do, if you have two hands to give, if you have food in your kitchen and a table and a home and a place, that you need to be in constant service to others. So everything that you are, everything that you have is only because of the grace of God and the mercies and the gifts that he's given us. So it's all about regifting. It's all about giving out, So we grew up, and it was often, individuals who had just come from Mexico or El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, Nicaragua, and my father and my parents would both open their home up to people, and families were staying in our rooms, or we had people at our table. It was constant. So when I think about faith and my faith journey, it's not as this yes, it is this traditional, like going to church, but it was, what I know, it was Sunday through Monday. It was constant. How are you living as Christ in terms of the example that he gave us, and what ministry are you, everything that Christ gave you, how are you turning it around and really ultimately giving him glory? And so, that's a short version of my faith story. And I think that my husband and I, we're raising 4 children in the Bay Area. And I think that we're trying our very best to live out that model of, how can we give and do and be in service to others.
That's an incredible story. I love that so much. And I mean, it makes a lot of sense. Or actually, sometimes people who are raised in like ministry homes kind of run screaming in the other direction, but it's such a testimony, I think, to your parents and your father and the way that they lived out their faith. It wasn't just about rules or about doctrine. It was about actually embodying this life-giving ethos, and it makes sense. Or it's beautiful that you have, in a way, followed in his footsteps into this ministry of reconciliation. Right. So I think it'd be really cool to hear, just kind of like in a nutshell, what does your organization do, and how do you serve the peninsula?
Thanks for the question. So just to be clear, the organization is not a faith-based organization. That is my personal story. We are a nonpartisan organization that is about conflict resolution, alternative dispute resolution, communication, and restorative practices. We really do believe that through our processes, we are able to advance equity. And what that really means is that regardless of how conflict shows up in the community, because I don't know, Matt and Tony, maybe for you all, but where I live, conflict is inevitable. And actually, all we need to do is pick up our phone, right? And we see it on Instagram, Twitter. I mean, for the love of God, we see it on Twitter.
Yeah, we do.
See it on Facebook, and we see it on every possible platform that we have. And conflict exists in our families, in our workplaces, and on our schools, and with young people learning how to live and interact with each other. So for me, this has been my own personal ministry to be determined that wherever conflict is and wherever it shows up, that we can learn how to not agree to disagree, but how to be respectful and accepting and caring about each other and understanding, right? So Tony, Matt, you all have different stories, and the way that I work around my own biases is that I ask questions. Tell me about your story. Help me understand your culture, your community, things that make you you, so that I can ultimately be a better me. And that's what's it about. You know, I think that's at the end of the day, that's what it's about.
Okay, so let's talk about that a little bit, because I'm hearing myself somehow, which I wasn't hearing before. Hold on.
You're echoing.
That's weird.
There you go.
Okay.
You better.
I agree to disagree. I want to talk about that a little bit, because that is a very, that's a very interesting phrase that has been around for quite some time. I mean, I can remember that from, when I was a kid and hearing my parents talk about things, or my parents and their friends, or my aunts and uncles talk about things. Right now, that phrase especially is getting some really good pushback. In the form of a meme. The best meme I saw was like, we can agree to disagree on pizza toppings, but not about racial justice, like stuff like that. Talk a little bit more about how that phrase needs to be changed, or what we can do when that phrase comes, because obviously holidays are coming, and virtual or not socially distant gatherings will be happening, and there will possibly be conflict around politics, around racial justice, around pandemic protocols or not. How do we handle stuff like that when someone says, let's agree to disagree, as a way to shut the conversation down?
Can I throw one more thing in there?
Yeah.
Another thing that will be coming up around the holidays is conversations around sexuality. I work with an organization called the Christian Closet, and we are mental health and spiritual health professionals who do online groups and one-on-one sessions with clients. And we notice every single year around the holidays, this is huge for our clients. They are having to go home, having to deal with parents or loved ones who cannot accept them as the queer people that they are. And so I think that's another really huge area of conflict that is coming up like right around the corner for a lot of people.
Right.
Good.
Yeah. So I don't know if y'all brought me on here to stir up some stuff. That's
Bring it on. Bring it on, Michelle. Bring it on.
To offend anyone, but I'm going to tell you that statement is the biggest cop-out. It's the biggest cop-out, and it's just such it lacks so much integrity and courage to lean in and have the difficult conversations. And this doesn't mean at the end of the day that you and I are completely transformed because of this one conversation that we're engaging in, and that I have to be, it's completely 100% census driven. That's not actually how conflict works. When you think about conflict, it has three spokes to it. It's the content, it's the process by which you engage conflict, and last but not least, it's the relationship that you're engaging and the person you're engaging with. And so regardless of the topic, right? So here we are, and you mentioned all kinds of very complex issues. The idea is not to cop out. The idea is, because I'm in relationship with you, regardless of the level of or the depth of relationship I'm in with you, you are valuable to me. And because of that, I'm going to sit in uncomfortness and work through this, through conversation. And that's how we address conflict. And, it's not avoid. I'm going to tell you, there's, we have a little bit of a, funny way of describing our conflict personalities. We have the ostrich, who sticks his head or her head or their head in the sand and refuses to address it. We have the lion or the shark that attacks. I'm uncomfortable. I feel, full of fear or anxiety, so I'm going to attack. We have a variety of different personalities, but the one that we're really leaning in is to the personality that says, I'm uncomfortable right now, but I'm going to work through this in order to have deeper understanding for the person that I'm in a relationship with. So the goal is to have deeper understanding. The goal is to have deeper sense of empathy. The goal is about increasing the communication and understanding. Not at the end of the day that I have to completely feel the same way that you do, but I I have to respect you. I have to be in community with you. So, there's not a simple solution. I mean, unless you really just want to have life on your own, live on your own at all times, but there's always going to be some rubbing against. And the idea is, not for us to sit in comfortness. I think when we're too comfortable, that's not good either. We really do need to lean into the discomfort. But it's the biggest cop-out, we agree to disagree. That's saying, you know what, you really don't matter enough for me to get into this, or it doesn't really matter, or you don't matter enough, or you're not valuable enough for me to really listen, ask questions, be uncomfortable, check my own biases, understand my own temperature, and how this, and listen attentively and remove everything else. And that's not easy.
You're reminding me of when I was in counseling. I went on individual counseling for myself, and then my wife and I did premarital counseling, and then we did couples counseling just to survive and thrive. And one of the main things we always go back to is this practice called the speaker-listener technique in conflict, because it's so easy just to villainize the person who you disagree with. And our counselor would say, just call a timeout, throw a white flag, and say, okay, let's do the speaker listener technique. You speak and I'll listen, and I can't rebut or get defensive. I have to listen and then repeat back without putting my bias or my opinion on it. And that's been really helpful. It's still really hard. What I hear you saying too is, if when we get into these places where we feel pressed against the wall and someone is trying to cop out, is there something we can do where we say, like, can we just step back a second? Can I repeat back what I think I hear you saying? So it sounds like you're saying this, you believe this, you don't think that, you think this, you think that. Okay, is that what you're trying to say? I just want to make sure I understand you. Help me understand better, if not, and give the person a chance to talk. Is that kind of what we could be doing? Like when we find ourselves in those conversations, like what if someone does use that and they just don't seem to want to move forward and they kind of throw their hands up? Is there any other techniques that we could do to be engaging?
So the first step that we really, that we describe when we're talking about conflict is, especially, depending on how complex or how heated it gets, is cooling down. Take a step away. When we're so deep in the conflict and it's so close to us, it's hard for us to think about reconciliation. It's hard for us to think about restoration. And so it's important for us to say, let me just take a time out right now. Can I come back in 5 minutes? And then going away and checking ourselves, and, we need to be ready to listen to each other. We need to be ready to listen to each other. I want to make sure that I'm saying that correctly, because it takes a moment to really work through and say, I'm here. And it's not easy, right? You talked about the relationship between you and your wife. Sometimes it could be a parent-child relationship. As I mentioned, I have 4 children, and they range between the ages of, oh Lord, how old are they? 25 and 12. And so it's hard to listen to something when they're wrong, right? You're convinced they're wrong. But that's not going to help us at the end of the day trying to get over conflict. So I need to calm down. I need to check my own biases. I need to be ready to listen. I need to use I statements, right? This is classic stuff we heard, right? Hey, not Tony, you're infuriating, I'm furious. You're irritating me. You're getting on my nerves. It's not about that. It's about, Tony, when you say that you can't be around me right now or whatever, that really hurts me. I feel embarrassed, or I feel ashamed, or I feel frustrated. Name it. It's not easy to name it. It's also really easy just to say, I feel uncomfortable right now, or I feel scared right now, or I feel nervous. I don't think we own our emotions enough. I don't think that we own our feelings, because we're ultimately responsible for how we feel. I'm responsible for how I feel. And I don't actually make you do anything. You have to be in control of that. Now, we have an exercise that we do in person. It's this ball toss exercise. Many of you might have heard of it before. You get in a circle and you start throwing balls in a certain pattern to each other. And then you continue to introduce different objects into the circle and as you're communicating. And then you introduce different shapes and sizes, and they're not all balls, they're spiky things. And then you introduce stuffed animals. And the debrief is, continue to do it, and people are dropping it and they're laughing. And how can you do it without, talking to each other? How can you do it with nonverbals? What is the body language you're telling each other? And a lot of it, at the end of the day, after you reflect on that exercise and you relate it to conflict, you ultimately say, now you can't control how I throw something at you, Matt. And we could be in a conversation and I say something completely that catches you off guard and makes you feel very uncomfortable and sad and it's hurtful. You can't control that, but you can control how you respond to it. You can't control how it lands with you. And you can control how you then, in fact, either encourage further conversation or cut it off. Or, there is a lot of things that we can actually control. So we want to be able to own that.
So we have a sorry. I don't know why I keep making myself stand by. Here we go. Okay. When I mute myself, sometimes it comes back with an echo. So Chris made a comment here, and I'm wondering if I might read into it a little bit, but Chris says, I understand where people are coming from, but I don't share their core or prioritize values. It's eye-opening sometimes. What I feel is important isn't the same for others, and most often it's based in my lived experience. So I wonder if she's talking about, Michelle or Chris, if you want to add more to this, what do you do when maybe you've practiced all these techniques? You're using the I statements, you're listening to the speaker, you're not getting defensive, but when it comes down, you're ultimately at the end of the day, maybe one of Matt's clients, is coming back to their dad and saying, so it sounds like you don't believe my life and my being, my orientation is God-given. And so therefore I'm living in sin. But I disagree with that, and it makes me sad, and I don't feel comfortable in this home. So then what, right? Like what happens then when people get to these places and there are two people who both are claiming to have a faith in Jesus and both want to do the right thing and are both trying to resolve conflict, but there just doesn't seem to be any movement.
Yeah. That's a hard one, right?
Yeah.
It is.
That's a really hard one. I don't want to minimize that example that you gave. That's a really hard one. You're talking about a child-father relationship and the pain that goes with that conflict is very different than two neighbors fighting over a parking space.
Right.
Let's, I don't want to minimize that at all.
Yeah.
And I think that the example that you also gave is an interesting one because it could be on sexual orientation, gender identity, culture, faith, specifics and principles when it comes to faith.
Sure.
So I'm going to answer the question with the PCRC hat first.
Go for it.
So it's important for me to have that dual role right now.
Yeah.
Ideally, in that type of a situation, the two individuals who are in conflict with each other need to examine the relationship that they have. And probably some hard choices are going to need to be made when you're in that fundamental space of where you are in an impasse. It's a word that we use when we're in conflict, when we talk about conflict, and it's also a legal word when you cannot see any possibility for forward motion and you've come to an impasse. You need to determine, are you going to turn around and go the other direction? Because continuing to fight towards that direction is not really going to get you anywhere. In that particular scenario that you described, that is one where it's not about mediating it. It's about restoration of relationships? And can there be restoration when fundamentally there's this lack of respect, mutual respect? So, it's not an easy, there's not an easy answer to it. And I don't want to pretend there is. Now, if you're asking me in terms of a woman of faith and a woman of prayer, the story and example you gave is one that breaks my heart. I think that it happens way too often. Right before we started talking about what is understood when we have our this name or this title of Christian, what's understood by folks within the United States, especially now. And I would, is that how Christ would respond in love? Whether or not I don't understand my child and have a different lived experience, am I loving? Am I asking deeper questions? Am I showing fundamental love and appreciation for the fact that he's in my life and he's a God-given gift to me, or she is, or they are, so I think it just looks very, very different. So sorry if I'm rambling. I think that it's just really a hard place to be, and conflict resolution is not easy. And I need to make the distinction between conflict resolution and restorative practices, where there's been a harm that has happened within a relationship, and not everybody is familiar with it. Restorative practices, in some places people call it restorative justice. You can't actually have restoration without justice. So let's be clear about that, okay? So I want to make sure that everybody understands that, that restoration and restorative justice, you can't actually have restoration without the justice. That's how come we have to say restorative practices. It's about addressing harm that has taken place within a relationship, and you see it in the juvenile justice system. You see it in the penal system, and working with the courts and whatnot in terms of making what was harmed or what was wronged right again.
Wow, I feel like we could just listen to this all night. It's so helpful and so important, and I appreciate just all the thoughtfulness, and I can tell there's like years of experience behind your words. So I really appreciate that.
Oh, thanks, Matt. Too many years. Let's not.
Well, I do want to ask this, because as I'm hearing you talk about, the word conflict itself in me tends to like bring up anxiety, How do you, as the executive director of this organization who literally exists to help people resolve conflict, how do you practice self-care? How do you encourage your employees to practice self-care? Because you could carry all of this in your body, in your mind. What do you do to make sure that you are not harmed by the work that you're doing?
And aren't you? And you must be perfect at conflict resolution. You just must. I just kidding.
Did I give you my husband's phone number? I don't think so. Been married for close to 25 years now, and yeah, he would respond differently. You were seriously not talking to him. No, I'm not. Remember I talked about the 3 spokes of content, what's the conflict about, process, how are you engaging, and then relationship. I want to just say the way that we teach and the way that we intervene with conflict, it's always hardest when the relationship is deeper, right? When you have a deeper relationship, when I'm closer to you, family, employees, you're with each other 8 hours, well, maybe not right now, but, 8 hours of the day, 5 days a week, 5+ days out of the, the week. And so we want to be realistic about, how much engagement we have with the children and parents, so the conflict is always harder, depending on the depth of the relationship. So that's important to note. And so you asked the question, how do we take care of each other? We do not assume that everything else that we're dealing with, right? We talk about racial injustice. We had talk about community law enforcement relations. We talk about, the ability for young people to be visible in the community. We talk about like all these different things. And you're looking at a picture, we're 99% people of color. Talk about diversity of sexual orientation, gender identity, faith tradition, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, agnostic, and so on and so on. We really try our best, and that's a picture of staff, but we have 250 volunteers who are really significantly part of our work. They're part of our team. And so the question is, we don't assume that we're not impacted by this work. That would be really ridiculous to assume. When I'm out facilitating a meeting and they're discussing the impacts of the Latino community on, their livelihood and those people over there and those people, they're referring to the Latino community, or, regardless of what it is, we don't assume that we're not being personally impacted by the topic. So what do? We lean into our practices, and we lean into our processes, and we come back to the office and we engage in restorative circles. We debrief the session. We ask for external support to help us facilitate or to help us run a dialogue internally. We really believe in coaching and mentorship. So many of our staff have mentors that they'll go reach out to. And we examine the cases that we're working on to ensure that, am I the best suited to actually go in there and actually facilitate? So, you talk about self-care after. It's really important for us to be preventative around that. Going into a situation that I know that my biases are really strong, am I really the best person to go and facilitate that? Probably not. I remember probably the first 10 to 15 years, I've been with the organization now 20, I just celebrated my 20th year. Wow. And I remember that at first I was like, in any faith-related conflict that came in, I want you to give it to me. I want to be the first person to do it. And I remember being about 10 years in and being like, I can't do those anymore. They're driving me crazy. And all I want to do is lay hands on everybody. Sorry. Sorry I had to get straight Pentecostal on you. Yes. But I was like, it's no longer about my ability to be to have an impact. It's about my ability to actually be successful, and am I going to create more harm than help? So we do our best to really take care of ourselves, and whatever else we need to do to heal, we engage in those conversations, and they're not easy ones to have, especially now. It's not easy to be an advocate for peace and respect and harmony and restoration right now, when conflict is just so thick around us. The fog is so thick. The polarized and the divisions within our community, the racial tension, all of it. It's not easy. But that's probably, why we're doing it, because it's needed.
I love it. The echo is back. Hold on.
Got to figure that out.
I don't know why that is. When I mute,
hear it. Maybe
you
it's.
Okay. All right. Good.
You sound great.
Thank you. When we talk about the divisions and the faith communities, and I hear you saying, I don't want to be in there. It's just too much. I feel that a lot right now. I feel, as a person of faith and as a leader in a faith community, I have been, maybe it's because I just was ignorant to the divisions in the past. They probably always have been there. And now we have more platforms to make those divisions louder. I think there's a lot of fatigue, disillusionment, discouragement for churches and people of faith on every side of the conversation. Do you have any thoughts about how, what we could be doing? I mean, one, I think stepping away from some of the toxic sources of these divisions that we're taking in, whether they are people in our family. Sometimes we do have to step back and go, for my own mental health, I can't be in a relationship right now, or I can't spend a holiday with you because it's just too difficult. I don't know if you have anything, if that's just kind of, well, that's a given. We're going to have to remove ourselves from social media at times and from family engagements. But do you have any other thoughts about how we can navigate through that as our faith sort of weighs or hangs in the balance here, and we find ourselves disillusioned a lot with people and how they represent Christ?
So I'm going to say, I'm going to go back to that scenario that I drew for you as we're in a live training and throwing objects around. Control and implement things that you can actually control. It's hard for me to say this because it's not easy. But I want to know, what impact are you having in your neighborhood? What impact are you having with your neighbors? Would you consider yourself a good neighbor right now? And I think that when we're talking about faith in particular, it's important for us to ask the question, if my neighbors are not positively impacted, impacted by me, then there's a problem. Am I really showing up with my faith? I think sometimes we take on the problem that is way too large. Now, there are definitely going to be those who are going to have a great, huge audience, thousands, and be able to impact thousands. But we can get in a place where we feel extremely helpless. So how is your faith being demonstrated to your neighbors? How is your faith being demonstrated to your community and your city, whatever it is you call your, how are you being a blessing to others? We've really determined that if we're going to show up in our community, we live in the Bellhaven community of Menlo Park, which is the eastern part of Menlo Park, that has been greatly impacted by tech companies. That community does not look the same that it used to look some 20, 25 years ago. It's drastically different. Gentrification has taken place. And that's a similar story to other communities in the Bay Area. So how are we showing up? Do something that demonstrates your faith. Shut the street down and do a small business Saturday event and invite some people that that have small businesses to set up shop on your yard. Take tamales to your neighbor and spread some type of love. Invite your neighbor that is Muslim into your backyard and exchange bread or conversation. Be in dialogue with somebody. Push yourself beyond the lines of feeling comfortable. And I think that once we can get into the habit of leaning in, it'll make it easier. But yeah, I think some hard choices are going to have to be made around Thanksgiving. Are you going to set up some group agreements before you cut the turkey? Set up some group agreements. If we're going to engage, we're going to listen to each other, engage in conversation, facilitate the conversation, create an agenda if you have to. Call us. We'll help you. Do you need a quick training on how to utilize listening skills and active listening principles? And, we can help you. Drop a quick, communications agreement with your family. We can help you. It sounds silly, but we can.
Mm-hmm. I like that. I like those intentional things. I think for some of our holiday gatherings, it's going to require that, because you're right, we can't control what our friends or neighbors or families, what they think or how they express themselves, but we can't control how we respond and how we navigate. But if we come in with some intentional good practices around conversation, I think that's a really great way. We have, this is a very small thing, but we have been in November. My wife is a preschool teacher, and she brought home some of these things they're doing with the kids, but real simple. Every night we just pull out a question and we're dialoguing, and they're very, chill type of questions. But for families right now, that are going to be heated. Perhaps there's a way to do that and to navigate that, not to avoid necessarily, but maybe that's a part is, can you do some softball, soft questions, and maybe keep, a level of a medium, maybe one hot topic that you then find a way to navigate, and maybe put a bipartisan person in there who can objectively moderate, the conversation, which sounds like super formal. But I think if we want our conversations in our families to go well, and we know that they maybe have not in the past, it's going to require, I think, some intentionality and specificity from what I hear you saying.
Anytime we attack any type of situation or case that comes to us that is full of conflict, we say 75% of the success of us addressing that conflict is around planning and preparation for the time that we're actually together. The time that we're together is a short amount of time. It's what we do beforehand. If I know that Tony, Matt, and I are going to come together, and I already know it's going to be a tense conversation, what am I doing in advance? Am I talking to Tony? Am I listening to him? Am I having him just really vent to me all the issues he has with Matt? And I'm going to Matt and I'm listening to all of the issues here and the fears and concerns. It is amazing what type of engagement we can have if we put in the right preparation and work. I mean, you take anything that is well done, that it wasn't in that moment, that there was plenty of planning and production that goes into it. And so it doesn't need to feel sterile. It can feel very relational. That's the intent, but intentional nevertheless.
That's good. Well, good. This has been super helpful. I know that you have an event coming up around racial equity. I'm going to pull it up, but do you want to talk about how people can join this Zoom call that's coming up? Oop, that's not it. Stand by, I'll grab it. And then,
for sure. Thank you. I'll talk about it as you look for the link. Thank you. Yes. So right now we are working with a number of communities throughout the region, Santa Clara, San Mateo County, and really beyond. We're working actually on a national basis to really address racial inequities and address the divisions that exist right now. And so the Board of Supervisors has asked us to facilitate a series of dialogues that will just completely open to the public. And so there's 3 that are part of this series. Anyone is welcome to come and talk about anything that they feel is really important for them to say and share. It's about, when we talk about community dialogues, we think of it on 3 different levels when it comes to dialogue. Number 1, especially when we're working with government entities, it's how are we potentially influencing policy and political practices and legislation potentially, right? So, right now in particular, we have a number of communities that want to talk about law enforcement, de-scope law enforcement, change law enforcement, have them move out of the way when it comes to issues of mental health. So that's a legislation. That's a type of political influence that can happen as a result from dialogue. The other thing is about collaboration. Here we are, the Quest, and PCRC that are potentially going to collaborate on different efforts to address anti-hate. So let's work together. So, right, big picture, global practices and legislation or policies that can change. Community collaboration and how we can work together. And then lastly, transformation, individual transformation. It's about storytelling. It's about me hearing Matt and Tony and Chris and, Alex and Stephanie and Jenny and whomever. And now I can't actually walk out of that engagement the same person that I was because now I've heard a story that is different than mine or that is similar to mine, or I can ask a question and feel safe or share and vent my own story about my immigration story or or my DACA story or my dreamer story. So when we talk about dialogue, there's so many outcomes, and for us, it's the change that can happen as a result.
Awesome. Well, any final thoughts or comments Please go ahead and post them in our chat. If you want to follow the Peninsula Conflict Resolution Center on Instagram, they are PCRC_SMC. You can follow them and you can learn more about the Zoom event that's coming up on their page. We also just posted that Zoom registration link in our chat. This is great, Michelle.
So good.
Thanks, guys. You guys are doing powerful, powerful work and creating platforms and opportunities where we can engage in these type of conversations. It's just such an honor to be with the two of you. So God bless the two of you. Keep it up.
Thank you.
I know that our paths are going to continue to come together.
Yeah, right on.
Thank you so much,
Cool.
Michelle.
Thank you so much, everybody. We will be back on Sunday at 10 a.m. Pacific time, 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for our last Sunday gathering of great news for Thanksgiving week. And tomorrow with our Quest family is virtual Bola. So Zoom at 7 p.m. Pacific time if you want to come and chat and just have a service of gratitude. We'll see you then. Bye, everybody.